everybody, LevDev here. Hope you all are having a lovely day. Well, as promised, let's talk about the glistening oil elephant in the room. For those who are not aware, one of the bigger plot reveals from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty was Jin Katatsius, yes, he was there, success of creating the first Phyrexian planeswalker. And to do this, he completed Tamiyo. So Tamiyo is the first completed planeswalker. It's safe to say that the community reaction to this was, well... While many MTG Forfos players know the impact of this, some players who are new to the game might be out of the loop and ask the following questions. What are Phyrexians? What does it mean when someone is completed? Why the completion of Tamiyo is really bad? And what will happen due to this plot reveal? So, let's get started. Oh, and before people ask why I have not asked Jen for my top 10 video of Neon Dynasty what the heck was going on, well, honestly, I don't speak Phyrexian, so I couldn't understand him. I don't mind punching him for what he did, but I didn't mean understand what he said, so just keep that in mind. So, nevertheless, let us talk about the plot implications of Tamiyo's completion.
Part 1. The Rise of Yawgmoth.
Okay, now, to explain what a Phyrexian is, I'm going to have to do a lot of summarizing. A lot of cliff notes, one could say. Because the history of Phyrexians, to put it bluntly, they are a very old threat. Like, we're talking like back in the days of early antiquities old. Like, back in the days of the professor starting magic old. Like, it's a very old story of the Phyrexian threat. Just to put it bluntly, I'm going to have to summarize around 28 years of lore in just a few sentences and paragraphs. So, I'm definitely going to be doing a lot of cliff notes. And if I say something as saying, like, Google it, don't take it as me being, like, dismissive gatekeeping. I am going to provide a link down below for resources for people to understand the story a little bit more and such. But to keep the video's link time not to be, like, over an hour or something, we're going to keep this short. So, what is a Phyrexian? A Phyrexian is a being that is a mechanical life form. A mechanical bio-life form, technically. What was originally created by Yawgmoth, for those who don't know Yawgmoth, he was a doctor that was originally in Fran. Google it. He was essentially a very sadistic doctor, tried to essentially do some very horrible things, like very bad things, even to the point that he got himself stuck in Phyrexia, which we don't know much about Phyrexia other than it was a plane, and essentially became its god. However, what he was doing is he was essentially Phyrexians were just essentially a cure for a disease called phthisis, I think is how you pronounce it. It was essentially kind of like a tuberculosis-like disease that happened when you essentially got exposed to Power Stone radiation. Google it. Anyway, the main goal of, though, being Phyrexian or turning into a Phyrexian basically amounts to replacing all of your organic components with artifice. Like, you still keep your personality, you still keep your memories, but essentially, you are essentially non-organic, or as they call it, the weaker components of yourself. They're pretty much taking a philosophy that's in the realm of high level of social Darwinism, and essentially just replace it with mechanical that would be the more completed form. Now, at first thought, this may not sound that bad, until you read more into it and realize the process of completion costs, I don't know, one's soul. And also the fact that more of the philosophy behind Yawgmoth's completion and his philosophy is, in general, is very close to the philosophy of eugenics. I feel like I don't have to explain why that's bad. Do I have to? Yeah, he was a very not a good guy. He was a very, very bad guy. Oh, and did I forgot to mention that the more mutate... Essentially, how do I phrase this? Like I said, I gotta summarize 28 years of lore. But basically what happened was, he essentially escaped to Phyrexia and became their god, and essentially formed what basically amounted to an artifact death cult. More or less. I guess the best pop culture equivalent we have to it is Star Trek's The Borg? But yeah, pretty much it mutated into a cult that feels like that pretty much their main goal philosophy is that everyone should be completed. Even if it's against their will. You don't want to be completed? Yeah, that's bad. You're being completed. You have to be part of the progress. You're part of the machine. We're going to make you force the machine or not survive. Like I said, combination of eugenics and social tourism up to a scary ladder. But yeah, it's bad. Let's just put it like that. It's very, very bad.
Part 2. The new Phyrexian threat.
Okay, so what happened to the original Phyrexians? Well, as stated before, they kind of formed essentially a cult, and the cult's main purpose was to essentially go to other planes and complete them. One of the first planes that they tried to go back to and complete was Dominaria. They had plans, they tried to raise a whole army of essentially their completed soldiers and all that, to essentially try to complete this goal, and through a variety of events that are just essentially amounts to 20 years of NTG lore, pretty much had semi-successful attempts, some failed attempts, and then one very successful attempt, which then led Yawgmoth into the plane of Dominaria, spreading his infection until he was stopped originally by the heroes of the Weatherite and using a weapon known as the Legacy Weapon, which then essentially ended the Phyrexian threat as we know it from then. However, Phyrexians were not the end, let's just say, due to an unfortunate accident that Karn did when he was on Mirrodin. For those who don't know, Mirrodin is an artificial plane created by Karn pre-Mending. For those who don't know what Mending is, we're talking about essentially the event of the Mending of Dominaria. Long story short, essentially there was a time where Urza was an idiot and actually did an event that caused almost the destruction of the entire universe and plane of Dominaria as we know it, and essentially it took a bunch of events that we don't have time to talk about to essentially mend Dominaria and fix it before everything went to heck, for lack of a better word. And this mending event did a lot of events that happen in MTG lore that we have to talk about. Specifically, the ones that I'm going to emphasize here is it downed the power level of Planeswalkers, who originally Planeswalkers were very powerful individuals, like the power of God level individuals, being able to even create their own planes out of their own will. And also was not able to be completed because essentially they had their own, essentially, more or less, put it bluntly, they were so powerful that they can determine what their form was, more or less, is the best way I'm going to phrase that. But essentially, pre-Mending, they were very powerful, they were able to create their own planes. Karn created his own plane, which was known as Mirrodin. He let Mishra took care of it, I believe is the name of the original caretaker. Long story short, essentially what happened is Karn accidentally, due to the creation of him, which was essentially used as essentially a weapon against Phyrexians, he had a component of Phyrexian with him that was in his heart, which had glistening oil. For those who don't know what glistening oil is, it was a bioweapon created by Yawgmoth that essentially completes a individual. It is probably one of the easier processes to complete an individual and make them into a Phyrexian, so just keep that in mind. And then through a lot of events that happen on Mirrodin, including the contamination of the World Soul, which we don't have time to talk about, essentially created New Phyrexia. New Phyrexia is now the new home for Phyrexians, that each encompass all 5 colors of mana, which each is led by a Praetor. You probably have seen some of these through either your EDH games or from the new Praetors that we've been seeing in Magic through Kaldheim and Neon Dynasty. Basically, these are the leaders of their respective domain. Jade Gataxias is the leader of the blue mana, kind of like Phyrexians, Vorinclex green, Elish Norn white, Orobask red, and Shieldred black. But essentially, these Phyrexians all have their own variation of their philosophy that's encompassed of their color, However, it still has essentially the general philosophy that was originally from the original Phyrexians from Yawgmoth's creation, which is essentially to, as stated before, invade other planes, complete all the things. And that's also including bringing Yawgmoth's completion to the other planes through any means necessary. Speaking of which...
Part 3. The Future of Phyrexia.
Okay. If there is one comfort for MTG Vorpals players, even though the fact that we know the Phyrexians were a ridiculously big threat to not take for granted, was the comforting fact to know that at least the new Phyrexians from New Phyrexia were more or less stuck on their plane. They didn't really have any access to any ways to transport to other planes like they did previously in their previous old iteration. I'm not going to go into details, but essentially, more or less, they were stuck on their plane, completing the individuals that were still stuck on there, but more or less was not able to enact the philosophy of Yawgmoth to go to other planes. However, due to Neon Dynasty, we learn of two plot elements that kinda changed the tables with that fact. First one, we learned that Tezzeret is, for some random reason, working with the Phyrexians. Now, one of the main mysteries that are in the Vorpals community at the moment is wondering why the heck Tezzeret is working with the Phyrexians, other than just some general basic assessments such as, well, Tezzeret worked with bad guys before, why not now? Or maybe something along the lines like he has ulterior motives. We really don't know the motives of Tezzeret for cooperating with the Phyrexians here, so keep in mind, he's now just essentially working with the Phyrexians for some random reason. However, another thing to keep in mind, due to this new cooperation, that gave the Phyrexians, aka the new Phyrexians from New Phyrexia, access to a tool that they previously did not have. For the realms of a plot that we don't have time to talk about, aka for those who want to research the plot of Kaladesh storyline, Tezzeret is, or technically has, a tool on him known as a planar bridge. This device has the ability to transport, like, simple pottery plant, or even like a, I don't know, kind of like in a previous plot, a whole army of zombie warriors across through the plane of Ravnica. Oh, and did we mention that we remember that Phyrexian's main shtick is removing all their organic components and being machines? So yeah, essentially, one way to put it is now the Phyrexians have access to essentially a transportation device to get to other planes. That is very bad. However, it also seems their goal has a bit of a twist we learn with the second plot reveal, which is that they are needing planeswalkers to complete. Now, originally, this was technically not possible. Oh, just to be frank, a post-mending planeswalker can be completed. However, the completion, as stated before, costed one soul, and when one loses their soul, they lose their spark, which is the thing that allows planeswalkers to, well, planeswalk to other planes. However, through what we believe to be the reality chips doing, the device that they were working on in Neon Dynasty, they now have discovered a process, essentially, to complete a planeswalker without losing their spark, essentially. And the fact that they're not only able to do that now is bad. The fact that they can essentially now infect planeswalkers, which can now infect other planes through their will, that's really bad. However, the worst part is who was the first Phyrexian planeswalker, which is Tamiyo. Okay, for those who don't know, Tamiyo is a Moonfolk planeswalker that originated from Kamigawa. She was originally a truth seeker. This basically means that she always wanted to go and seek the truth, in other words, seek information, and record it on her scrolls, which gave her kind of like powerful abilities with her planeswalker stuff. Essentially, she was one of the best scholar planeswalkers that is known in the multiverse. She researched multiple planes in the multiverse and knows a lot of details about them. Also, researched and knows details and information about other planeswalkers, which, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Essentially, with Tamiyo's completion, this essentially gave Phyrexians what basically was the in-lore equivalent of Planes of the Multiverse by Jay and Ellie. By the way, go read that book. Very good book if you want to actually understand more about planes and such, so give that a read. But basically what happened with Tamiyo's completion, they essentially got what basically amounts to a in-lore equivalent of that book, which means they now not only have information of other planes through Tamiyo, but also have information of other planeswalkers that, from what we originally known from the plot, they would not mind to have a completed chat with. That is very bad. I mean, and it's not like they're hinting the fact that we're going to get more completed planeswalkers, like she will not be the last, or in the realms of the fact that we got a whole new mechanic based on the first Phyrexian planeswalker. Oh boy. So, what does it go from here? Honestly, with this bombshell of a plotline, really the only question is not if other planeswalkers are going to be completed, but more of when. In other words, what is the pace of this plot's development going to be? And to be honest with you, this is a tricky one to gauge. Remember, last year when Vorinclex appeared on Kaldheim, we thought that this was essentially the start of the plot and essentially was going to go full steam ahead. Like, we thought we were going to see Jin-Gitaxias on Jin-Gitaxias on Strixhaven, and then just see like maybe the other Praetors on Innistrad. Like, we thought the plot was going to go a lot more faster than it originally did. It took a full year going to Neon Dynasty to get a continuation of this plotline. However, with the upcoming sets, one being Dominaria, a plane that had a very heavy history of Phyrexians, and then the next one being the Brothers' War, which is an event in the history of Magic where Phyrexians were very much involved, it might be safe to say we're going to see Phyrexian planeswalkers and maybe even Praetors sooner rather than later. We're probably going to see the continuation of the storyline within this year. Hey, look at it this way. Probably the best way to sell those booster packs is if you can have access to Phyrexian planeswalkers. Especially the collector boosters, so, just a thought. And that is the plot implications of Tamiyo's completion. That was a lot to go through. However, as sad as this event was, heck, Tamiyo was one of my top 5 favorite planeswalkers, it was a very impactful story moment in the Vorthos community, and actually brought a lot of the Vorthos community together. It was really cool to just see all the reactions, the fan art, essentially their implications of guessing what's going to happen next in the lore. Even like some essentially fan fictions and such of who might get completed next and such. And who knows, we don't know what's going to happen and who gets completed next. Please don't be a Johnny, please don't be a Johnny, please for the love of God don't be a Johnny. Please. I hope you all have a lovely day. See y'all later.